Even though there were many deaths to this point in the Hargis-Cockrill feud, there were several families involved. The feud really didn't hit the papers until the deaths of Cox, Cockrill, and Marcum. These three men were very prominent in the community in their own standing, and their deaths would be shocking to the citizens. In today's video, we will be looking at the deaths of these three men and how their deaths not only upset the community, but the cry for courtroom justice would now ring through the mountains. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up that time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but it convinces YouTube that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. Dr. B. H. Cox. While there is no actual person who was blamed on this crime, the death of Dr. Cox is laid at the feet of the Hargis faction. The article in the Semi-Weekly Messenger tells us that Dr. Cox was very vocal about his views about the contested election between Judge Hargis, Ed Callahan, and J.B. Marcum, and for this reason he was targeted. This event would take place just 2 months after the saloon shootout between Thomas Cockrill and Ben Hargis. Here is a summary of what the Washington Times has to say about the death of Dr. Cox. Not even 30 minutes before his death, Dr. Cox stood at the door of the steps to his office and told a friend that he felt that there were signs giving a bad omen of a killing that night. However, a call came for a doctor. Ignoring the signs around him, Dr. Cox grabbed his satchel and walked down the steps and onto the street without a thought. It is thought that his assassins were stationed at an outhouse near a store. After taking just 6 steps, a shot rang out in the Jackson, Kentucky air, and Doc fell dead on the street. There were a couple of reasons listed for his making the list of men to be killed. One was that he was married to a sister of Jerry Caldwell. Caldwell had killed John Tigg Harris in the shootout in the train passenger car on the way to Beattyville, Kentucky. Second, he was also guardian for the Cockrill boys. And Tom Cockrill had killed Ben Hargis in a saloon shootout. And third, he had went out on the streets at night, ignoring basic mountaineer caution. While his death would be unanswered in the court system, confessions would be made. His death completely shocked the community, as this was a very hard blow to lose such a popular doctor and citizen. James Cockrill. Because of the threats that Cockrill had received and the shooting of his brother Thomas and the death of Dr. Cox, James Cockrill left town for a short time. He had plans to stay away from the area when disaster struck. According to the St. Louis Republic, quote, Jim Cockrill, who had continued to serve as town marshal, left the town. Cockrill had decided to remain away and had gone back to arrange some business affairs, intending to leave town on that same day. He was on his way to the train in the afternoon and had stopped in front of the courthouse to speak to a friend when several shots rang out and he staggered back wounded. Trying to fire his pistol, a second volley killed him, and for half an hour no one would go near the body, unquote. On July 29, 1902, near the courthouse in Jackson, Kentucky, James Cockrill would be shot to death by Curtis F. Jett. Curtis would be taken into custody and brought before a jury. According to the New York Times, quote, Cynthiana, Kentucky, September 22nd, Curtis Jett, after a trial lasting 8 days, has been declared guilty of murdering Town Marshal Thomas Cockrill at Jackson, Kentucky, July 21st, 1902. The jury, bringing in the verdict, had the right to fix punishment at life imprisonment or death, and gave the latter verdict, unquote. It was not that unusual for names of family members to be mixed up when their deaths or other traumatic events took place over a short time together. We think this may be the case with James and Thomas. In several articles, James would be listed as the town marshal, and in other cases, Thomas would be listed. In either case, we feel that it was James that was struck down in front of the courthouse on that day, as Thomas was recovering from his injuries from a saloon shooting. Jett would not remain in jail long. According to the website article, Kurt Jett, the Wild Dog of the Mountains, quote, Kurt Jett was a member of the Hargis clan in the Hargis-Cockrill Feud. Once, he was under a sentence of death, but the Kentucky Court of Appeals reversed the verdict, and he accepted a life term without appeal. That was for killing of James Cockrill, July 20th, 1902, near the courthouse at Jackson. He claimed an alibi, declaring he was in Hargis' store down the street. Cockrill was shot from the courthouse window, unquote. Curtis Jett would later give a full confession of the murder of James Cockrill as well as others, but he would use the excuse that he was at Hargis' store to get a pardon from the governor of the state of Kentucky. This caused much upset in the county, and the Republican Party of the time would use this as a rally cry against the governor in their next election. But for the time being, Jett would sit in jail while awaiting word for his release as told by the newspapers. According to the Evening Bulletin, quote, Governor Beckham has pardoned Curtis Jett just once, and then James Marcum, whom Jett afterwards assassinated, recommended the pardon, unquote. This is our understanding of these events, and if we are mistaken, please comment down below. James Cockrill was slain. Curtis Jett faced charges and had the death penalty placed upon him. His sentence was commuted by the Court of Appeals. He was then released and pardoned by the governor of the state of Kentucky. After his release, he then killed Marcum a year later in 1903. He then went to trial for the death of Marcum, and the courts reinstated his sentence for the death of James Cockrill. It is quite ironic if Marcum pursued the cause for Jett to have him pardoned by the governor, only to be killed by him. However, from what we can gather, from this point forward, Jett does serve his time under the charges of both murders. Attorney J.B. Marcum. On May 4, 1903, Curtis Jett and Tom White shot J.B. Marcum to death in the doorway of the courthouse in Jackson, Kentucky. Marcum was a prominent local attorney, trustee of the University of Kentucky, and a Republican leader in Breathitt County. Because these murders happened sort of back to back from each other by Curtis Jett, we will cover his trials in the next episode. According to the Bloody Breathitt, Kentucky Feuds and Wars website, we have a bit more details of Marcum's day before he was assassinated. He left his home early that morning and kissed his wife and sleeping baby goodbye, as was his practice since he found out that there was someone hired to kill him. He placed a revolver in his pocket and headed out of the door. Quote, his duties as an attorney for the Eastern Capitalist led him to the county clerk's office in the courthouse to examine the titles to some tracts of land for his client. He had finished his work, or nearly finished it, when he walked into the corridor of the courthouse and stood in the doorway talking to his friend, Captain B.J. Ewen, a deputy sheriff. He paid no attention to a partition in the courthouse, behind which might be concealed a hidden assassin. He was discussing politics with his Democratic friend and making plans for peace to again come to the county. He had just remarked, quote, if Judge Little is nominated by the Democrats for county judge, the Republicans would not put out a candidate, and perhaps it will bring harmony into the county again, unquote. Tom White passed by and looked at Marcum. Marcum and Marcum's former client, Mose Feltner, had charged in affidavits that Tom White was a hired assassin, hired to kill Marcum. Marcum remarked as White passed by, quote, that is a dangerous man, Ewen. I'm afraid of him, unquote. From behind the petition in the wall, a shot rang out, and Marcum staggered and fell to the ground, mortally wounded. Ewen stepped out of range of the gun going around the corner. The man who made the shot coolly walked up to Marcum and grasped the revolver with both hands and shot Marcum in the head, killing him. According to Mrs. Florence Patrick, the niece of Marcum, she wiped blood away from Marcum's eyes. He was then taken across the street to Dr. Cash's office, where he passed away after being there for 15 minutes. This shooting took place in front of a dozen men. Several were willing to say that they had a good look at the shooter, because after he shot Marcum the second time, he placed the revolver in his pocket, straightened his coat, walked around the corner, walked outside of the courthouse, and mingled in with the crowd. Other men who were present were not so willing to risk their lives in identifying the shooter, or could have possibly been the very people who hired the man in the first place. As we have been covering the Appalachian feuds and outlaws for most of this past year, we can understand why everyone felt that there was no true justice in the mountains. It seemed that as soon as everyone who was feuding went to court for the murder of someone, they would soon be released out of jail and would be back at it again shortly afterward. Some of these men would rack up over 50 or more kills to their name due to this revolving door policy. The burning of Ewen's hotel, or Hotel Early. Witness intimidation was nothing new in the mountains. It was not that unusual for there to be threats made or even ambushes to kill off potential witnesses before a jury could be sat at court. Even after the person was found guilty, the witness was not safe from their faction's vengeance. We found the following story in the Pacific Commercial Advisor. The following events happened on June 14, 1903. There was an eyewitness to the shooting of J.B. Marcum, Captain Ewen. He would be the principal witness on the stand against Hargis-Jett and Tom White. Before the trial began, a warning was sent out to Ewen that he should think twice before giving his testimony. Part of the warning included the burning down of his personal property, the Hotel Early. According to the source, quote, large numbers of both factions to the feud are in the city and they surrounded the burning building. A detachment of the 2nd Regiment of the Kentucky National Guard, which had been on duty ever since the murder, cleared the space around the burning building and prevented a pitched battle between the two factions. Other witnesses against the two men had been intimidated. Unquote. Will there be justice for the burning of the Hotel Early? Will Captain Ewen testify regardless of the threats? Will those that have been active in the feud ever face justice for their actions? We will leave this feud at this point in the story. Next week, we will pick up with the trials of Hargis-Jett and Tom White, and how the witnesses were targets for both sides of the feud as the testimonies on the stand begins to heat up. Thank you. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian feuds. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notification. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries in Appalachian history.